Most of the time when you're out filming, the little LCD on the back of your camera isn't good enough for nailing focus and getting proper exposure. So you can add something like a 5-inch external monitor, but sometimes even this isn't big enough. You need something bigger, a lot bigger. This is the new Osee Mega 15S field monitor. This is the box it came in. No one watches unboxings anymore, so we don't need this. Now, why would you need something like this when you probably already have an external monitor? Well, did I mention it's bigger, like a lot bigger? Huh? Okay, that's not the only benefit. There's a ton of other things packed into it. Let's talk about it. There are 4 main benefits to having a monitor like this. And the first one is to the client. Anytime I'm on set and I'm working with a director, an ad agency, a producer, you've got to have one of these. Oftentimes it's called the director's monitor. And this is the thing where you see everyone kind of huddled around it, watching what's happening. That is a must-have because if you are the only person filming with your camera, no one else can see the shot. They can't see what you're getting. And if you're getting paid big bucks to do this, they want to see what you're getting so they can approve it or give you recommendations. And that in the end is gonna make a much, much better product. There are a lot of ways that you can get the image from your camera into the monitor. The way that I'm doing it right now is just using a simple long HDMI cable running over to my FX6 that's filming this little vignette that you see here. And when I'm shooting in a studio scenario where we're not gonna be moving around a lot and I'm mostly just on tripods, that's what I do. I just plug an HDMI cable right into the camera. But if I'm gonna be moving around a lot doing handheld work or gimbal work, that's when I grab my wireless transmitter. This is the Hollyland Mars 400S Pro. Something like this is perfect because you can just mount the receiver on top of the monitor and then run a short HDMI or SDI cable to the monitor. The second benefit is to the crew. So when I'm working with gaffers and grip and we're getting lighting set up, I can just point to the shot and reference things and say, hey, this area needs to be brighter or move that. I don't like where that spot is hitting. And they can just visually see what I'm talking about because sometimes it's hard to explain things without seeing it. And then they can even go back to the monitor and reference it and check their work. It's also great for hair and makeup because they can check talent constantly and make sure they're not seeing any shiny foreheads or flyaway hair. The third benefit is to the cast or talent. Sometimes it's nice to be able to just flip the monitor around and show them the framing so they can see how they need to kind of sit or where to put their hands.
I'm not sure what to do with my hands.
Specifically when you're doing interviews, but of course you want to flip it back around because it's very distracting to see yourself while you're being filmed. Another nice thing is that they can watch playback on this so they can review how their performance was. The fourth benefit is to you, the cinematographer or videographer on set. So you can actually see what you're shooting really well and catch things that sometimes you don't even see on a 5-inch monitor. Little details that once it's blown up, you're like, oh, there's a water bottle right there. We're not filming Game of Thrones. Get that off set. Or there's, of course, tools built into it that are really helpful for getting your framing, getting your exposure, everything like that. Now that we've covered why you might need something like this, let's look at the actual features of the Osee Mega 15S. Starting with the build quality, the monitor overall feels pretty great. It's made of a really solid plastic in the front with plastic buttons, and then on the back it has a full metal construction. So this is super solid and it has a metal handle up top and other metal mounting points. And like I mentioned earlier, this is a 15.4-inch display diagonally across, and it gets up to 1500 nits brightness, which means it gets very bright. Brightness can be hard to show on camera because you can set the camera to any exposure, but to give you an idea, right now this is set at 0% brightness on the backlight, 0. So let me turn this thing all the way up to 10, and there we go. It's a lot brighter now, and hopefully you can see this area is all kind of white and blowing out. And I'm also going to show you some clips of the monitor out in direct sunlight so you can see how it performs in bright lighting situations. Now, I'm going to get into what all the buttons and knobs do as we dive into the actual operating system a little bit more later. On the back of the monitor, you have 2 SDIs in and 2 SDIs out. Then you have only 1 HDMI in. I would have liked to see an HDMI out port as well, so you can send the signal along that way if you need to, but it's not a huge deal because you do have SDI out. Here in the center of the monitor, they have a V-mount plate built in, which is awesome because if you're out in a remote area and you don't have somewhere to plug into, you can just throw one of your V-mount batteries on the back and power the entire unit off of this, which is just incredible because it opens up so many places to have a field monitor on set where sometimes this would be difficult to do. Now there's a cable here that goes from the V-mount plate and plugs into the back of the monitor to feed in the power. Now, as far as my experience goes with other devices, typically you don't want to power them off two different sources at the same time, so I'd only run this off the V-mount battery or the AC inputs. And really one of the only other main things on the back here is the power switch. So you've got to have that on to be able to turn on the monitor. There's a power button on the front as well that lights up with a little red LED letting you know that this switch is on. There's also a USB-C port here on the back for calibrating the monitor. And one other really cool feature is this little cheese plate that it comes with. You can actually remove this with 2 screws and mount it in any corner of the monitor. And what I've done already is throw a cold shoe on top so I can easily mount my wireless transmitter right here. There's also a built-in metal top handle here, which is nice because it makes it easy to quickly move the monitor around, and then you can just fold it down out of the way when you don't need it. Now that we've covered the build and physical features of the Mega 15S, let's dive into the software and operating system. I think it's worth mentioning right out the gate that this is not a touchscreen display. That's part of what keeps the cost down on such a large 15.4-inch display. So what that means is you have to control the entire thing from these buttons and knobs at the bottom. All right, now we're gonna take an actual deep dive into the actual settings and menus of the Osee Mega 15S. So there's a lot to cover here. I'm not gonna go through every setting, but I'm gonna be as thorough as I can. And so you actually have something interesting to watch while we're going through the settings. I'm just playing back a bunch of my reels and short films here, so it's not just a boring static camera feed or something for my camera in the office. So the first thing we're gonna look at is actually how to get the input set properly. So that is this button right here. This is the input button, and right now I have it set to HDMI. There's only one HDMI input, and then you have SDI 1 and SDI 2. And to set it, you go to it and then just let it go. And there it is. Now it's set to SDI. Obviously I don't have an input there, so I'm gonna go back to HDMI. That's the first thing that you're gonna need to do when you get the monitor out of the box and you get it plugged in. You gotta make sure you're actually on the correct input. Once you've done that, you can dive into all the other settings. Now, one of the first things that I did was actually turn off the volume, because when I'm using this, I'm just using it to see visually what's happening, and I'm listening to audio elsewhere plugged into the camera with headphones. So that's probably a setting you're gonna wanna turn off right away as well, and I'll show you where to do that. To get into settings, you click down on this knob, and then you click in, and that brings you into the main settings. Now, the first thing I did when I got it was I went into volume, clicked in, and then I went down to 0. Now, of course, you may want to watch playback with volume, and of course you can turn that up and down here. You can spin the knob to turn it up and down, or you can hold it left or right. But I keep mine at 0 because usually during playback, I don't want to hear any audio, because when you're filming, you're going to hear that audio live during playback, and of course that's going to cause a loop and an echo. So before we take a deep dive into what each of the menus do, I want to show you what a couple of the buttons actually do. So again, on this knob, if you want to quickly zoom in and check your focus, you click up on it. That'll take you to 2x zoom, then you click in again, and that'll take you to 4x zoom. Now, if you want to move where this little white box is, this is not a touch screen. So normally you would just touch it and move it around. For this, you can't do that. You've got to click in, and then now you can see those little arrows on the left and right, and you can actually move your zoom around. So if you really got to check the focus in a really particular spot, you can just move this little window around, and when you're done, click in again, and you can stop moving around. If you want to get out of your zoom, you just click down, that takes you back to 2x, and then click down again to just get to fully zoomed out. So that's one of the first things you're probably going to use, because you want to use a big 15-inch monitor like this for checking focus. When you click to the left or right, it's switching through pages. So you can see page 1 here, page 2, page 3, and then it loops back to page 1. So those are places where you can set up each of these pages to do specific things, like one for focusing, one for exposure, and maybe one for your framing, that sort of thing. Okay, now that you know mostly what this button does, besides getting into the settings, let's take a look at each of the 4 function buttons here. So function 1, and this will bring up all the different functions that you have set by default. I've already changed some of the default functions here, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So you click in here, then you can click here on the thumb wheel, and that'll bring up all the tools, and you just use this to go through them. You can also spin it to go through them. So I'm going to spin to F1, and this is the aspect ratio. To activate any of these tools, you click in, and that will actually activate it. But if you want to change the settings for it, you click over to the right. Right now we have it on 9:16 for phone. So if you're shooting vertical, obviously it's really nice to have that. But you can just go ahead and dial through this and get all the different aspect ratios that you may need. And of course you can set up a custom one as well. Now what's cool is the transparency. I like this because you may want to be able to see a little bit outside of your grid. Let's say you're shooting for horizontal and vertical. You need a frame for both and you just want to have a little bit of transparency. Or you can have it full black so you don't see anything because you're like, nope, I don't want anything in the shot there. And then I'll show you what other ones it kind of comes by default. So you've got your center marker. You can go in and customize that. You've got your crosshatch. You can also customize that. So one function that I already set up custom is false color. So you can adjust this to be whatever system works best for you. Right now I have it set to follow camera, but you can scroll over to spectrum. This is what Blackmagic does for a lot of their false colors, and see what it's doing there. And then there's also a custom mode, which is really cool because you can set all of the tones that you want exactly for your false color. So let's say you want to get a really specific skin tone, or you want to get your blacks in just the right spot, or your whites, you can do all that there. And what you're seeing here is when you stop playing with the menu for a minute, it goes away. It just auto goes away after. This allows for 2 tones and they do it in different colors. So if there's a specific spot you want for skin tones and you want your skin tones to go zebra once they hit the right spot, and then maybe you want to see where it's clipping over 100% so you don't accidentally blow out your highlights. So it's really cool. I haven't seen a 2-toned zebra like this before. That's pretty advanced. Usually you can only set up 1. So now let me show you how to add another tool to page 1. So you don't click on the plus button here, you actually arrow over to the right, and then it brings up an entire menu of tons of options. So I'm not going to go into every single one of these, but let me just quickly read off what you have. So the ones that are already there, we've gone over, and we have anamorphic, false color, zebra, waveform, vector, histogram, focus assist, peaking, D-log, your user LUTs, and then multi-scopes, audio meter, and time code. So there are a bunch of options that you can put in there. What I'm going to add now is the waveform. So I've selected it by clicking, and then there it is. It's not activated yet until I click in. Now it's activated and you can see it here. You can adjust where that's at on the screen. So if I want it to be in a different spot, I can go here, bottom left, top right, bottom right. So I'm going to put mine in the bottom right, and then you can change the size of it as well. So right now I've got small, large. You know, if you really need to see what you're doing, turn it on and off. Or if you always want it on, it's probably best to go with small. So now let's go to page 2 by right clicking on this little joystick, and let's set up some tools here. So you'll go into function 1, and it's already got a few set up by default, and this looks like kind of the exposure page that they've set up by default. So let's go back to this. I'm going to click into it so you can see what we've got. So we've got our multi-scopes, false colors, zebra, waveform, vector, and histogram. So it's really nice that they've already have this set up by default. And let's go to page 3. So we'll right click over and see if there's any defaults here. So I'll just click function 1. Okay, here we go. And it does look like they have this set up for focusing. So focus assist, peaking. So let me show you how to actually customize what the function buttons are. So you go to your joystick and you click down, and then you click in to get into settings. And there's a ton of things in here that we're going to get into. But first I'm going to show you function controls. So you click up to get to function keys, and then you're going to click over here and you can adjust what they are. Now right now, because I've created the page already, they are tools 1 through 4 on the page. By default, they're going to be the top 4 that you have. But let's say you have 5 or 6. Well, you can menu over, and now tool 5 in your custom ones is going to become that, or tool 6 and 7 and so on. Okay, now that I've covered a lot of the basics on what each of these different buttons do, how you turn everything on and off, let's dive a little bit deeper into the settings. So again, you click down on the joystick and then you click in to get into the actual settings for the monitor. So we've already seen how you can change the inputs. You can do that with this button here quickly, or you can also go into it here and change it from HDMI to SDI 1 and 2. We'll go back to HDMI. I've shown you how to change the volume controls. Now let's take a look at the backlight. So this monitor gets really bright. And that's one of the key features of this monitor, that it goes up to 1500 nits brightness. So I'll show you 0, and then we'll go all the way up to 10. Now obviously it can be a little bit difficult to tell how bright a monitor is when you're recording it with another camera and whatever its exposure is set to, but trust me, this monitor does get really bright. Okay, you can rotate the display, so sometimes you need to actually change the orientation of it, so I can flip it upside down depending on how you need to mount it. And you can also mirror the image. Then you've got probe location, which honestly I have not dived into. I'm not sure exactly what that's used for, but it looks like something about the LUTs. Status display. So this one's kind of nice because if you want to see a couple more things about the monitor itself, if you're running on batteries, for example, you'll see it up there. And then you can turn everything on. And this is nice because you can actually see your input resolution, which right now we're doing 1080p, 60 frames per second, and I can see it's Rec 709. And then you can change a whole bunch of different things here, like your camera profile. I'm gonna leave it the default. Same with the input matrix, shooting in Rec 709. If you need to adjust these things for customization, you definitely can. Signal format, I leave auto. Color management as well. And then you can load in 10 different user LUTs. And you can do that by plugging in a standard USB right here in the front, USB 2.0 or 3.0. Get your basic monitor information, so if you need to do firmware updates, you can see where you're at. Change the language if you need something other than English. Do a factory reset, calibrate the color, and then get your helper display and back onto function keys at the very bottom. Now I want to show you how you can plug in your headphones to this monitor. Right here in the front there's a 3.5 millimeter jack, so you can just plug in right there. Whoa, what the heck happened to the monitor? Just kidding, dad jokes. Now let me show you how you'll probably be using this monitor most of the time, and that is with this really cool travel case that's fully integrated and mounts on a C-stand, as you can see. This is awesome. So one of the first things you can see is, of course, it's got a top handle. So when it's not mounted on the C-stand, you can pick this thing up, move it around on set. It also has loops here, so you can throw it on a shoulder strap. So if you're walking through an airport or something, there's a really nice, safe way to transport this. Now, this is gonna be a little bit hard for me to see from the side, but I'll turn it towards the camera so you can see straight into this thing. It looks like we're at a freaking NFL game and I'm about to make a call on a shot. Nope, timeout. Oh, foul. I know nothing about sports. You're not gonna get any sun flares or any big sunlight hitting this. And to make this a little bit easier, I'm just gonna take the case and throw it onto the C-stand. There's a little metal grommet here that it goes through. I'll just put it on there so it's a little bit easier to mount and show you guys. Now, we've got this little back strap that keeps it in place. I'm gonna get that out of the way. Now there's some straps to keep the monitor in place, so I'm gonna kind of pull these out of the way and pull them around the monitor as I mount it. And I'm gonna put it onto the C-stand baby pin again and pull these straps out. Okay, then we're gonna clip them together. And then you have this little Velcro piece here that kind of protects the V-mount battery area. And something I thought was a little bit strange about this is where it wants to Velcro, this little knob gets in the way a bit. So you can spin it out of the way like I was showing you earlier, but this knob still kind of sticks out. So you kind of just have to bend this back and Velcro it on. I did think that was a bit of a weird design. There's not really a better way to Velcro this on because that knob sticks out so much. Now, what's cool here is with the case, there's some back pouches here that you can put accessories in. So right now I've got the legs stored in there. So I'll show you how you could take something like this 99 watt-hour small rig V-mount battery and throw it into this pouch here so that once you leave the studio, you have a V-mount battery on you for when you're out in the field. That's pretty cool. And then it'll still zip up even with that V-mount battery in there. So there's also a pouch here where you could store a couple other little accessories, an HDMI cable, SDI cable, something inside of here. All right, so this monitor hood is pretty enormous. I'll turn it to the side here. Looks like it's about 1 foot long, maybe even longer. So when you want to close it up, it's really easy to do. You just fold everything in and it just goes like that. And then there's little clips here in the front to clip it all shut. So let's say we're plugging in the power cable here on the right. Then we're also going to plug in our HDMI cable. Well, you can just take these cables and feed them out to one side. And then you can still zip this up and just leave them coming out the side. So I'll show you that. Now, one thing I would have liked is if you could actually keep the monitor in the case, but remove the monitor hood. The monitor hood itself is actually sewn onto the whole thing. I do wish that they would have made this removable as well. Maybe if you could just like zip it off or Velcro it off or something. I I absolutely love this travel case sun hood combo. So what are the cons of the Mega 15S? I've already mentioned a few of them, but one of them for me that just slows me down a bit is the fact that it isn't a touchscreen. Sometimes it's nice to be able to just touch around or pinch to zoom in and out. It makes things really quick on set. But it's not a deal breaker for me. You can still navigate around all the menus just as you need to using the buttons here. Like any new device, it takes some time to learn how everything works, like selecting, going back, going forward, that sort of thing. It just takes some time. There's a bit of a learning curve because it's not extremely intuitive like we've all become used to just using iPads tapping around. And one other thing I'd like to see is the ability to do split screen. So it'd be nice to be able to plug in up to 4 cameras and monitor each of those feeds. But I understand that that would make it more expensive. So if you have something like the Blackmagic A10 Mini Pro, this little switcher solves all that problems because I can take up to 4 HDMI inputs here and then just loop out the HDMI and do the split screen here so that I can actually see everything here. So it's really not a big deal if you have a switcher. Other than those few things, I think the Mega 15S is an awesome field monitor and can be a game changer for you on set. So if you want to pick one up for yourself, definitely check out the link in the description below. And I want to say a special thanks to Osee for sending this out for review. They didn't pay me to say any of this or see this video before posting. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video.